So we've been talking about the preparation that the Jews had to make in order to leave Egypt, and how the preparation included taking this lamb and tying it to the bedpost, and that's supposed to represent being willing to make a tremendous sacrifice, because there was high risk. It was very high risk to do that. So the idea was, because they didn't necessarily have enough mitzvahs in order to facilitate, in order to deserve to leave Egypt, that's what they needed to do. They needed to do something which was really radical, where they laid their lives down and basically said, we're ready to do whatever it takes in order to be committed to Hashem, and that's what got them out of Egypt. And then we said that the principle is, whatever happened at the time of the Exodus from Egypt is a template that we're supposed to refer to and to borrow from in order to prepare ourselves to greet Mashiach, which means that we also need something which is radical and something which shows a tremendous amount of sacrifice in order for us to get Mashiach. So the question is, where do you sacrifice? Because, of course, if you ask different people, you'll get different answers. Some people will tell you, obviously, what it means is you have to be absolutely dedicated to Torah mitzvahs, even to the point of sacrifice. Now, the truth is, while that is true, it is true, you do have to push yourself, and you do have to be willing to do things that are uncomfortable. The truth be told, I think we've mostly passed the period in history where in order to live as a Jewish person requires tremendous sacrifice. And you don't have to go back that far, because even if you go to, let's say, the 1950s, and let's say you were living in the United States, and you wanted to run a business, and you wanted to keep Shabbos, it was a real challenge, because most people could not get employment if they were unwilling to work on a Shabbos. And even if you look here in this country, you speak about people who own their own businesses in the retail environment. The thought of closing a business in retail on Shabbos was so bizarre, was so far-fetched. So that took a tremendous amount of commitment and a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And perhaps in other areas as well. In the early days of the groundswell Baal Teshuvah movement that we now take so for granted, people lost connections with family members because they wanted to observe a different lifestyle, and now they couldn't travel to be together on a Shabbos, or they wouldn't eat in the same places because of kosher, or whatever the particular conflicts were. And perhaps, we've got short-term memory, so maybe we forget just how hectic that was and just how much sacrifice people had to go through. But in today's world, there's not really any major area of serious sacrifice that is required in order to become an observant Jew, to be a committed Jew. Society allows it, society embraces it, and yes, of course, there'll be a commentary about, certain ideas within Judaism that maybe certain people are not comfortable with, but by and large, in order to be an observant Jew in today's world, you don't necessarily have to put your head on the chopping block. There's no real sacrifice. So where is the area of sacrifice that is required in order to facilitate the coming of Mashiach, perhaps more than any other area within Judaism? So chatting last night with a group of people in one of the shiurim, we're talking about the concept of, it's incredible how good we are as a Jewish world at finding issues with our fellow Jews. It's like incredible. So the first place that it starts with all the labels. Start to define what kind of a Jew are you, and then the natural next step is that an acceptable kind of Jew to the kind of Jew that I am? And we do that a lot. It's kind of become very much part and parcel of the Jewish experience. So you got the whole list, and I think the list keeps changing. Orthodox, conservadox, modern Orthodox, Haredi, Hasidic, this kind of Chassid, that kind of Chassid, and it becomes so incredibly divisive with such a heavy criticism that goes with it. So if somebody is not exactly like I am, we tend, and it's not correct, but we tend to do it. We tend to say, oh, that person, they're not the real deal. They're not authentically Jewish. And the truth is that probably one of the greatest divides that exists today in the Jewish world, particularly in Israel, is between those who are very religious and those who are very, very secular. And there's this terrible animosity that's developed between the two groups. And you could spend a lot of time pointing fingers and deciding who's to blame for it. It's actually meaningless. What does it help to blame? At the end of the day, we need to address this. Now, to get people to sit down and to interact without judgment is a big ask. So it's fascinating. If you want to live as a Jewish person, whichever particular kind of level of Jew you want to be, you will find a place to be able to do it. And you won't have to sacrifice your value system necessarily to be able to be Jewish. But to get two different Jewish groups to be able to get along and not walk and kind of, snub the other person, that's actually where the sacrifice is needed. Because in order to be able to accept your fellow Jew, and not just to accept your fellow Jew, but every single morning in our davening we say, Hareini mekabel olai, I accept on myself, mitzvahs, I say the positive commandment, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, not just to accept and tolerate my fellow Jew, but to actually love my fellow Jew. Because the truth is, I should accept all people, and I should tolerate all people, unless, of course, they have malevolent intentions. Like if somebody wants to hurt me, obviously I don't have to tolerate them. But as a Jewish person, I should tolerate everybody and accept that everybody has their path and everybody has their purpose, and I should accept everybody. But to love, that's a tall ask. It's a tall ask to expect that we should love every single person on the planet. To accept people and to respect people, that you can ask. It's very interesting, for example, that the Torah tells us that we have to respect our parents. It doesn't necessarily tell us we have to love our parents. So some people will argue that's because it's natural to love your parents, and some people will say because sometimes it's impractical to insist that somebody loves their parents, but at least you respect them because they are your parents. So by the same token, it's impractical to expect us to love everybody who's out there, but you certainly can expect us to respect everybody who's out there. When it comes to our fellow Jew, that same fellow Jew that we've got so many issues with, because we believe, and it's a fascinating thing to see, how many groups there are within Judaism who will point a finger at another group and say, those are the ones who are destroying Judaism because of their backward thinking, or because of their progressive thinking, because of their insular society, where they refuse to interact with the world, or because of their open society, where they assimilate into the world. So it's fascinating to what extent everybody's able to find a reason why the other group, those are the people who are destroying everything. So the Rebbe says in this particular sikha about the lesson we're supposed to learn from the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice that the Jews had to have in order to earn their rights to leave Egypt. He says that for us in our generation, the Mesiras Nefesh sacrifice that we need in order to earn our rights for Mashiach is to be willing to sacrifice everything for the care and concern and love for a fellow Jew. And sacrifice means a couple of things. Firstly, it means, so obviously the audience that typically would learn this is the more observant audience. And so typically the sticking point is often with the Orthodox or the religious and how they see or treat those who are not so religious. So he says you have to have Avas Yisrael. That's the guiding principle. So to get up onto your high horse and start criticizing other people and say you're not as religious as you should be, or you're destroying Judaism because you don't care for the religion, and you're not keeping our traditions, and you're willing to assimilate, and whatever other accusations you're willing to hurl at somebody, it's all worthless. It's all meaningless, because your responsibility is to love that person. Now what happens is this. It's a fascinating thing about human psychology, but I think it's really true. What happens is it's easy to take a group of people and to put them into a category and then take an attitude towards that category of people. But the moment you interact with an individual from that group, it's much more difficult to just dump the individual into the category. So like the old joke that they tell, what's the difference between a Jewish person and an anti-Semite? The difference is that the anti-Semite says, all Jews are thieves, Jews control the world, Jews are horrible people. So you turn to the anti-Semite and say, but your doctor is Dr. Goldberg. He says, yeah, Goldberg is an exception. Speak to a Jewish person, what a Jewish person say? All Jews are good people, Jews have good values, Jews have helped the world in the most incredible way, the world doesn't appreciate our contribution. But what about Goldberg? You have a faribel with Goldberg. Goldberg is an exception. So basically what happens is that we tend to look at groups in this homogeneous way. It's similar to what they tell you when you're in the Kruger Park. Don't stick your head out of the window of the car, because the predator sees the entire car as one entity. The minute you stick your head out, you look different to the group. So by the same token, when you look at a group, it's the easiest thing in the world to say, that group, we don't like that group because we don't agree with their philosophy, and we don't like the way that they're behaving, and we think that they're doing damage. So we write off the group. But when you interact with people as individuals, you can't do that, because you start to see them as people, and you start to see their uniqueness, and you start to see their values and their virtues. So that's Mesiras Nefesh for Avas Yisrael. We have to be willing to sacrifice our worldview that we are so dedicated to, and instead get down to the personal connection with the individual, so that I can appreciate the individual for who he or she is. Because when I do that, a number of things will happen. The first is, I won't write them off and ostracize them and distance myself from them. Second of all, if I really care about somebody, I want to add value to their life. Now, if I believe, as I should believe, that Torah and mitzvahs is real value, then I'm going to put in Mesiras Nefesh, I'm going to put in sacrifice to go out there and share it with that person. Sacrifice means I'm not going to take, like the old saying goes, you take that sign, the sign that says, whatever evangelical sign, you see those guys walking around with their sign, the end is nigh, or Jeremiah 31, or whatever it is. You take the sign and you bash it over the next person's head. That's not the Jewish way. You don't go and bash somebody over the head with your beliefs. Mesiras Nefesh means I'm willing to let go of my personal feelings about this. I'm willing to sacrifice the sense of criticism that I feel, or the sense of discomfort that I feel, or the sense of judgment that I have. I'm willing to sacrifice all of that to reach out and to touch somebody else in a meaningful, caring, and uplifting way. And very often, people will say, yes, I've really tried, and I wanted to connect with the next person, but it hasn't worked, and they've got a wall, and they just reject me out of hand. So the Rebbe says, if you really try to care about somebody, and the response that you get is that they reject you, then you obviously don't really care about them. It's the easiest thing in the world to blame them and say, well, I tried, and they just kicked up a fuss. But the truth is, we have a principle in Judaism that says, Devarim hayotzim min haleiv, nichnosim el haleiv, upoyalim pu'ulosam. That words that come from the heart will always enter the next person's heart and have an impact. So if I don't see that there are results, and I don't see that the next person is responding well to me, then I haven't had enough Mesiras Nefesh, meaning to say, I haven't pushed myself enough to find within myself enough love of that individual, that they would feel that love and therefore be open to hear what it is that I'd like to share with them. So that's the Mesiras Nefesh. This is the sacrifice that we are required to make in order to bring Moshiach. Not to sacrifice for our fromness, not to sacrifice for our sense of belonging to a particular element of Judaism, but our sense of sacrifice to be willing to put aside all my preconceived ideas to actually reach out and care about the next Jew, and that's what's going to bring Mashiach. Please God, as we said yesterday, please God, it should be today.